Arthur Brooks is an economist. He used to run the American Enterprise Institute, a very conservative economic think tank. And I point that out to you. He also, by the way, is a French horn player. I don't know that you'll meet many economists that also play the French horn. But I point out to you his history because what I'm about to tell you about what he said, I don't think most people would assume would come from someone with Arthur's pedigree. And he was an interviewee on Freakonomics podcast, and he's written several books, and he's been a colossal failure at the things he's been saying, by the way, and it doesn't make any of them any less true. So let me just tell you that up front, right, that he's written a few books on this very concept, and he'd be the first to tell you, I've failed miserably at these things. But if you listen to him, you'd go, oh, but he's right. That's often the case, isn't it? People don't like hard truths. We kill prophets, we always have. Up to and including Jesus, right? If people push us too far, we kill them, whether it's physically or just assassinate their character, but it's what we do. So here's what Arthur says. The way out of the contemptuous political situation that we find ourselves is love. Love. That's not what most people think of when they think of our political problems, think that what we need is love. Although as believers, of course, we would say, well, of course that's what we need. But he's not approaching it from a faith standpoint. He's approaching it from a commodity standpoint. He's approaching it from looking at what the research tells us. The Harvard Study of Adult Development, which is a longitudinal study of 80 years, looking at the development of humans over a lifetime, found that when you take people as they're later in life, to the extent that they are well and happy, they all have one thing in common, and it has nothing to do with income or where they live or what language they speak, or what job they have or what God they worship. It's love. So as Arthur says, happiness is love, full stop. Happiness is love. And so as he looks at the contemptuous political situation, he sees and knows that the only thing that will move us off the center is that. You know, and you say, why are you talking about the politics? Because the politics are a reflection of us as people. And as people, we see the same reflection in our church. There's a contemptuousness to a lot of things. And while you may say, I'm not participating in that, great. But the reality is it can creep in for each and every one of us in some way. And Arthur makes the point that, the difference between anger and contempt. Anger is kind of a hot emotion, has a passion to it. Contempt is actually pretty cold, and that it's anger plus disgust. And so, if we're going to make a change in our culture, in our church, in our politics, in our world, and as I've been joking for the last several weeks, fortunately we don't have to, things are pretty good right now, so we don't have to worry about this, right? Oh my goodness. But it should be speaking to all aspects of our lives, or it isn't truth. If the truthiness of the gospel doesn't apply to all situations, then it isn't truth. It's just philosophy or opinion. But we know that it's truth. And so it's asking something of us. So Stephen Dubner, who runs the podcast, an economist, one of the co-authors of Freakonomics, the book, said, okay, let's write the econ paper then. If these are commodities, contempt and love, what's the equation? What's the supply? What's the demand? And how do we adjust it? And so Arthur continues the analogy to say, the equation is your vice is your commodity divided by your love. I'm sorry, contempt. I said commodity, didn't I? Your contempt divided by your love. And the thing is, if you want to change the anger or the contempt in your space, you don't do it by just saying, I'm not going to do it anymore. That just doesn't really work with our human nature. If you're struggling with an addiction, like if you're a smoker, I'm just not going to smoke anymore. Well, it doesn't work, right? It sets up this loop of cycle that when things get difficult, we return to what we know. And so, as is in the case in economics, you want to change the equation, then you grow the denominator. You have to grow the love. And you may be saying, what does this have to do with the gospel, Father? Well, it's just very simple in that you can't separate the two commandments. They're so connected. They're two sides of the same coin. And so if we say, well, but he said this one was first. But remember, that was the question, what was first? And he added the second. Basically to say, you can't separate these things, brother. Oh, scribe, you can't separate these things. This is one and that's two. Like two sides of an album or two sides of a coin. You can say one's first and the other's second, but they go together always. And of course, the scribe says, you're right, right? He puts them together almost as one. You're right, Jesus. And then the end result is him saying, you're not far, brother. You're not far. You're right there. And I love the way this ends. I don't know about you, it sends a chill down my spine. And no one dared to ask him any more questions. Because I think they're afraid of what he would say, right? I don't want to know anymore. You've already pushed me so far. And so if we're going to grow the love, then we have to grow both loves, not just one. We can no longer separate those things out. We can't just talk about the worship of God. That becomes like a false piety if we disconnect it from how we know each other. And it doesn't take long to connect those steps. Love your neighbor as yourself. Oh, you remember in Luke, one of the new scribes says, who's my neighbor? They start to unpack the thing. Okay, we're following what you say. Got to love God, love neighbor. Who's my neighbor? Remember what he said? Oh, people you don't like. Enemies. People you hold contempt. Those are the people you got to love. Pope Francis, in reflecting on this very gospel a couple of years ago, is saying we've got to be careful that we don't just create initiatives, that we become like spiritual stations of service to others without ever knowing them, without ever engaging them, without ever pulling them into relationship. Because if we don't, then it will always just be separate. And we'll be able to say things about people that may or may not be true. And we have to be able to admit there are people that we have anger or frustration with, or their positions don't line up with ours. And again, in that sense, I'm not even talking about politics. I'm talking about church. I'm talking about our belief systems. And then if we can stop and go, but you know what? I'm that person for somebody else. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? But these are the difficult things that we have to open up that book and read it and let it challenge us. And understand that he's not asking us to do that alone because we can't. He has said that so many times and in so many ways. And our defense mechanisms kick in real quick. Yeah, but what about this? What about that position? What about this thing? Remember when Jesus cleansed the temple? I love how much people quote Jesus cleansed the temple to me, which is something he did once. But there are things he said over and over and over again that people like to ignore because they're difficult. And he's really clear on this. Love God, love your neighbor as yourself. Who's my neighbor? Those I don't like. Those that I like to say are outside of my circle. The ones that I want to name as the losers or the heretics or the infidels, whatever word it is we want to use. We're going to throw them to the outside. And but if we do, we got to hear him say the opposite of what he said to the scribe. Bro, sis, you are far from the kingdom. You're far from the kingdom when you go at it that way. And we can convince ourselves we're not. But he lays it out in such clear terms. But as I said, he's not asking us to do that alone. He's just asking us to be honest, to be faithful. And as we come to this Eucharist, to realize that's what he's giving us is his presence. The person who did it. The person who laid down his life for others. And particularly his enemies. I will never tire of thinking about the fact that as he's saving us, as he's beaten and broken and nailed to this tree, and many of the people he's saving are openly mocking him doing this. I don't know about you. I think I've used this with you before. You know, if a crazy person broke in here and said he was going to kill all of you unless he got to kill me, you can imagine you all turn to the back of the room and then swivel back to me and say, what do you say, Father? Sounds like a good deal? You were just doing that denominator thing? You're going to do it, right? And I'd say, okay, I will. You're right. A couple hundred of you, one of me. But as I'm walking out of here to offer my life for you, if I start hearing the whispers of, what a loser, what an idiot, can't even save himself, can't figure out a way out of this, what a loser, I'd just turn around and go, take him, forget it. You can't be grateful for what I'm going to do for you? In this moment. He's loving and dying for enemy. And he's asking the same of us. And what we're doing right now, all over the place, is just driving a deeper and deeper wedge. And you know what? In the short run, it feels great. It scratches the itch. But after a while, that feeling of relief from the scratch goes away, and what's left is raw, sometimes bloody, but always painful. And so we have to open our eyes to the truth that our God is laying out for us, that Jesus walked and lived. He didn't just say it, he did it. And it's the challenge for us. It's the invitation for us. But as I said, he's not asking us to do that on our own. We have our spiritual push-ups to do here, but to be strengthened, he gives us his presence and says, I'm the one who conquered that. I'm the one that overcame your weakness and your sin. I conquered death for you. Take me within you so that when you go out there and you have those difficult interactions and conversations, it's my strength that you bring to that situation. And then as we meditate on the cross, as I said, we don't want to disconnect that. I want my worship here today to be leading me to my love of neighbor. Otherwise, we just do this and go home and go back about our ways, when what we need to be is on the way. And so that's his word. As I said, it's a great challenge. And if we want, we can just try to make it about something else. We can focus in on one little piece if we want. But that's not this guy who dies naked, nailed to a tree. In that very action, he's testifying to love of God and love of neighbor. And he's asking something of us. As I said, it's very hard. It is. I really wish it wasn't this way. It'd be easier if we just did it my way. Don't you agree? Or we did it your way. But we're on the way because he's the way, the truth, and the life. So let us accept the invitation. Think about all the ways in the next few hours we have to testify to this truth. Let the denominator of love overcome that weakness of the numerator. Francis de Sales once said it so profoundly. He's like, if you're struggling with a particular vice, then practice its opposite virtue. That may seem obvious and a little trite, but it's too the same thing. It's hard work. If I'm struggling with anger, then I gotta practice gentleness and humility. It's the way that it gets lived out in our particular opportunity and experience. So as we've heard his invitation to do this, we see his invitation to receive him so that we leave here changed. What an opportunity. As I said, we're all too painfully aware that the world needs this truth. So let us accept the invitation of his word, of his Eucharist, so that we leave here changed. May God be praised.